All right, no intro music. We're gonna go right for it today, gentlemen. Welcome back. It's been a while since we've done a stream with our buddy Edoardo here, and it's good to have you back, Edoardo. We don't really have much of an agenda. We decided we wanted to talk about, I don't know, all the bastardization of science and this contemporary period that we're in, problems with scientism, and we'll see where the conversation goes. For those who are unfamiliar. Actually, Eduardo, why don't you introduce yourself or reintroduce yourself?
All right, so my name is Edoardo. I'm an astrophysicist. I got a PhD in astrophysics. I worked 10 years in research in astrophysics field, so cosmology. And right now I'm working in machine learning field and data analysis. So I moved back to. I'm from Italy. I worked a little bit around. So I traveled to. I've been living in Spain, Germany, Israel. I'm been in Australia for a few months, and right now I just got back to Italy, and I'm working for a private firm in the machine learning data analysis field.
Cool.
And so yeah, I was perplexed as you guys are probably, but about the response that followed the pandemic. So I'm not so worried about the pandemic itself. I wasn't worried by that, but by the political response and the political, what do you say, like reaction that was triggered by this virus, and especially by the cover that scientists have been giving to some kind of to certain strain of policies and political actions. And I guess that's what we want to talk about tonight, right?
Oh yeah, so much material that we can get.
Can you hear me?
With this. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you. Okay, are we coming through?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Yeah, gentle listeners who are tuning in live, just let us know if there's any issues with the audio or whatnot. You know, there's
Okay.
Eduardo, you're also a musician. I want to make sure we mention that at some point. Maybe we'll get into talking music, but what I'd just be curious, right? Because you were doing the astrophysics thing for a while. What did you notice, in sort of the amount of time that was that phase of your life? Did you notice a distinct cultural or sort of political or ideological shift within the scientific community? Like when you were still in that world? Right? Was that something that was obvious?
Sorry, I missed like the last 30 secons of talking. I think my
I can probably articulate it better, right? So I've got Jim and I swim in the philosophical circles, and it's always a hideous mess, right? Has been for a long time. What I'm asking you is, as a physicist, right? Have you noticed or been surprised by any creep, if you will, any ideological creep? I know you're not doing the astrophysics thing anymore, but I remember you told me a few stories last time we were hanging out that really shocked me or surprised me of how like certain ideologies were trying to get into physics, right? And I just share some of your experience that you think would be relevant for this conversation, because I think so many people still have this like cartoon idea of science, right? Of like these people who just put the lab coat on, they're completely objective, they somehow can put aside all their biases, they can get right to the truth, they send that truth to CNN reports it to the people, and it's undeniable, right? And if you deny it, then you're a science denier, and many other worse things aside. So I just wanted to get you to just give us a little insider's peek, if you will, if you don't mind. Mm-hmm.
So as an astrophysicist, I would say I was pretty much insulated from the political. So, we are not dealing with climate change. We're not dealing with nuclear energy. We're not dealing with a lot of topics that have some deep political implications, so to say. So, in a way, I would say I was rather insulated from that. But still, like on a side, you would say that as far as my experience goes, is that most of the people working in the field, they adhere to some kind of left ideology. So from rather broadly speaking, which I mean, I myself, I might say I subscribe some of the principles of the left for some very specific topics. So, but I consider myself more or less of a free thinker. I usually take ideas and value every idea by itself, not by the ideological context it has been put into. So, but regarding science in general, I mean, it's very. I think it was pretty clear. I mean, reading. I'm a subscriber to Nature. I published a couple of papers in Nature, actually one, and then we're submitting another one. But anyway, so the thing is that I get to read it, and it's supposedly it should be like the most relevant, most important scientific publication on Earth, and you cannot but really see how much of these gender-related and other political charged issues are skewing like the kind of science that's being proposed there. And but putting that aside, I think that was pretty clear during the COVID outbreak and the kind of articles that have been published in Nature as well as in other relevant, important scientific journals. And I mean, there's the was the Flaxman 2020 article on Nature is one of the I think it's like my favorite example of how wrong it was. How can you how something like which has basically no scientific content is apart from the fact that it uses formulas and maths, so it uses the language of science to propose some completely non-scientific analysis of the outbreak of the COVID in Europe. I think it was analyzing some European countries. And so that kind of bias got me completely. I mean, that it's publishing this kind of like scientific. Again, it's not even scientific. It's just that they use the scientific language. They don't have any scientific content, in my opinion. And that's pretty much transversal right now. I mean, if you read the scientific debate, it's it's been polarized, and it's again like the official science establishments against the science deniers that might be, like important epidemiologists or physicians that might just be challenging on scientific grounds the status quo, which is again like having a status quo in science is a bit of a contradiction in a way. It's of course like the whole idea of science is challenging the ideas that are at the moment, and you have to defend ideas. You don't have to defend. You have to defend them with data and evidence and reality, and not just about with preconceptions or just outright banning some kind of speech or just saying that these ideas are dangerous and so you cannot discuss them and so on and so forth. I mean that was my.
So here's some things I've been thinking about lately in this vicinity, and this is coming at what I'm going to say is the plight of the layman in the current situation. Okay, so I can read a paper as well as anyone else, right? Okay, but I am not able to do the work to decide between dueling papers. Okay, so I can understand scientific results. Okay, and I can understand more or less how they're arrived at, but I don't know. I don't have the scientific expertise then to decide when I have contrary opinions coming from seemingly well-reasoned peer-reviewed sources, right? And what solves that is further science. Okay. But now it seems I have to make decisions about, what I'm going to do in terms of vaccinating my family, not and stuff like that, based on what look like, contrary scientific opinions that are grounded in pretty good research on either side. Like the debate in America right now, the big thing is I know in Europe, a lot of the passports and stuff have, a carve out if you have prior immunity. Okay. And so far in America, like the establishment is not recognizing prior immunity is all relevant, right? So then now what do I have? I have just, a lot of experts in Europe saying, no, we think prior immunity is lasting and effective as the vaccine. Maybe I'm speculating. And then you have like the official American establishment, which is not talking about it or saying something to the contrary. Okay. So you're in this position where as a layperson, I have to make a decision over which authority I'm going to trust. Right. But as soon as I say authority and trust, I'm no longer involved in this qua science, right? I'm involved in qua arbitrary decision, maybe loyalty, maybe subject to my own biases, gut feelings, stuff like that. Do you see what I mean? For me, like a principled non-intervention, it kind of governs it for me. And then throw into that on top of that is I think we have to make a distinction. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Between, say, the science of epidemiology or the science of immunology, okay, and public health, okay, because like public health is a social science built on ultimately changing behavior, right? It's built to get people to behave in ways that are going to bring about some aggregate good result for the health of the population, okay, and so its goal is the change of behavior. It's not necessarily telling the truth, right? Okay, it's not necessarily. I'm not saying it's going to lie, right? But its first thing is to say things that are going to get people to react in the way that's going to, in the long run, do the right thing. Okay, and how that's run at variance in America with actually telling the truth has become pretty clear now. Like you take the famous example where the CDC admitted that they said, yeah, we don't think masks do any good because they wanted to save up on PPE, okay, because they didn't want the population to go and buy masks. And then they came back and said, yeah, that wasn't so true. We think masks do good, right?
Right.
And we want you to do it. But so what you just admitted is your goal in talking to me is no longer truth, but the effect that your speech act will have on my behavior. Okay, so my relationship to you can only be like skeptical now, right? And so now there's this very weird situation where, at least in America, I don't know if it's the same in Europe, where, and that's just one example of many we could go on about, right? Where I have to, on the one hand, I have, very smart people saying we have to do X. I have very smart people saying we should not do X. I have my own physician whom I trust and love as a personal friend tell me just certain things, but then I can read other very bright, well-intentioned people saying other things. And all of this with the overlay that it seems that the public health establishment, even if they had our best interests in mind all along, have not had us as rational actors in mind all along. And then it's sort of like, well, it seems to me that we set a recipe here for a massive, massive anti-scientific skepticism.
Right.
Setting this up,
Yeah, a few quick thoughts, because there's a lot of really good and interesting stuff in there. And I think, if nothing else, we can all agree, at least in America, right, it's been nothing but a catastrophe in terms of trying to gain trust in these institutions, right? I mean, we know like skepticism is sort of at an all-time high, and you can't really just you
can't blame us, man.
You can't blame people at this point. Like, you've admitted, you've not only been caught lying, but you've admitted to being willing to lie to get people to act a certain way. So it's like at some point, it just becomes very rational for people to it's a natural bullshit detector, right? The other thing, Jim, that you brought up is, okay, like, Jim, you're a very smart dude. You got a PhD in philosophy, but you're not an epidemiologist, right?
Right.
Neither am I, right? So I can read papers, but we lack certain technical expertise in areas where we might not be able to get past a certain point, right? So then here's an important kind of like cool epistemological question. Like, are there other factors that can help like break the asymmetry breaker for us, right? And I think there are, in some respects. It might not be decisive, but it can be helpful. There was a paper published not too long ago that talked about the threat of Castro consensus, right? And how certain aspects of science merit a higher degree of skepticism because they're attached to portions of life that are highly socially and politically relevant or hot, right? So Edoardo kind of already hinted at this, like, where he specialized in astrophysics, it's like, what would the immediate social or political implications be of his research, right? It's kind of hard to see, right? So like
the rate of the expansion of the universe isn't going to cause the revolution, man, right?
Right. So it's like it kind of makes sense that he could just kind of be like left alone, like to just kind of figure out what the actual facts are, right? Yeah. But now if we're talking about stuff that could greatly influence elections, public policy, or how people feel about certain things socially, now we can start to see that pressures are going to start coming in, right? So doesn't mean that good work can't be done. It just means like, okay, maybe this merits a higher degree of skepticism on some level, right? Maybe not a cynicism, but maybe we should want a little bit more, right? And so that's one consideration. Like, is there a threat of social or political pressures or bullying here in this thing? And certainly that's been the case, right, on many aspects of just all the different sciences. Which it was funny. I think like what was that article that we were talking about before? Like pretty much everybody has published on COVID now. Like even like automobile engineer magazines. That was less on COVID. It's just like, well, who isn't talking about it now, right?
I mean, like if you think about the fact that the Nature paper I was quoting, the Flaxman et al. 2020, got more than 1,000 citations. Like publishing on COVID, but per se, it's like a huge industry. You can get, if you get the right paper outside in 1 year, you get 1,000 citations. It's something crazy. I mean, it's people, I think make a career out of it. You can make, and like thinking that scientists do not think in terms of what their incentives are, like citations and, how much influence you get by publishing on some topics and by publishing certain results on some topics.
I'm going to go take all my papers and make COVID the subtitle and see how many citations I get.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, man. All right. So just a few other things I wanted to throw out there. The other thing is of course, like, how are your predictions, right? Like if you have a long track record of just not just like predictions that are a little bit off, but like embarrassingly bad, that's a flag as well to me. And then there's been other indicators, and I'll name some people here that I think are important, like a Martin Koldorf or a Jay Bhattacharya, like public figures who are relevant experts who have pretty much nothing to gain and everything to lose by taking the positions they do, right? That's another sort of, another indicator, or at least another flag for me of like, okay, I'm going to pay a little bit more attention to this guy because a lot on the line to say something that's very unpopular right now. They're well credentialed. They're being, taken to task, slandered, really, a lot of these guys, right?
Oh, they are, yeah, sure.
So like, like not just a lack of perverse incentive, but like every incentive to not say this, right? And they're still saying it. This to me is sort of a credibility booster in some ways. So Jim, what I'm just saying is like, for the non-expert, right? Maybe there's other flags or indicators that people can think about, right, to help try and wade through this mess.
It's interesting, like it's almost what you've done there, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, Pat, is you sort of took that postmodern, you see it in like deconstructionist circles, right? That where the oppressed have a special insight into the situation, right? Well, I mean, there's something to that, right? Like there's a perspective that they have in not being the status quo that might let them stand outside of the groupthink in a certain way, right? So maybe indeed, like say, a homosexual in the 1970s was able to see something about reality that like, straight right America was missing because straight right America had never like challenged itself. Do you see what I mean? Well, maybe there's something similar going on here with say, a Stanford scientist who's questioning some of the COVID orthodoxy, right? Just because that person is in a sense oppressed and pushed outside, that there is a kind of critical stance that person's having that the status quo just is not putting itself to. Right?
And not just that, but like it's like predictions too, right? Like what we've seen is just one, just failed, enormously failed prediction after enormously failed prediction after, and like when do we give something up, right? Like when do we just say, all right, there's enough strikes against this theory, against your proposal? Where's the line? I know this is what we're going to talk about, right? There's got to be some threshold, right?
Two examples of that though, too, is like what's his name, Orstein, who's one of Biden's advisors. He's an epidemiologist. Joel Olstein, Orstein.
Joel, I don't think it's Joel Olstein. Yeah.
He was on. He was. Do you know what I'm talking about, Eduardo? He was on Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
He was on Joe Rogan like the first week of the pandemic and was like, "This is the end of the world, man. This is terrible," and stuff like that.
I remember that.
Yeah, and he had been kind of a gloom and doomer throughout 2020, and then this summer he did a couple interviews. He was like, the mask thing, I don't think it works. Right?
Osterholm.
Yeah, Osterholm, right? The mask thing, I don't think it really works. That's exactly what he said. But like, he was skeptical with the masks, and he was thinking, like, saying kids have to go back to school, and I think he was against mandating anything, but he wanted everybody vaccinated and stuff like that. And so that's a guy who, what he thought was going to happen didn't happen, and he changed his view as a result, right? Like, he showed himself sensitive to how reality was pushing back to his view, and there's probably a continuity. Another guy there is Marty McCurry from Johns Hopkins. I followed a lot of his stuff, and he was one who said, "No, I think we're going to have herd immunity by April." Okay, and of course that didn't happen. And he said, "Yeah, because I said that in January when I thought the vaccines were going to work to stop spread, not just case severity and all these things." And he has an account of as to why he's wrong, and he changed the view. I mean, it's like, I think you've gone to like conspiracy theory when no matter what the evidence is, the view doesn't change, right? And for me, it's not just your predictions came out wrong; it's that your theory can accommodate the failure and be adjusted. Yeah.
That's the first thing. But the second thing is that, for me at least, is there should be a view on science in which, of course, you have well-established facts in the sense that you have lots of experiments, you have lots of evidence on the side. They try to test the theory or test the model to to many different scenarios, and so you sort of have more confidence. I mean, science is a matter of degree of confidence. Now, in the case of this virus, there was basically no knowledge prior, and so people really didn't know how does it propagate, how does it spread, how severe
how deadly it is. Yeah,
how deadly it is. So there were all these factors missing at the beginning. So again, like at the beginning, I would say it's justified to be wrong. That's of course it's justified.
And the side to Iran was like panic, right?
Yeah,
yeah. It
so
was. Yeah.
I mean, like I would say, like afterward, back then, when the whole thing broke out, I adhered, let's say, to the Orthodox view that we should shut down everything and refrain from meeting and start to keep spreading, because in that worldview, in that view where you get the virus when you breathe close to another, and then you get the droplet and so on and so forth. And that's how the thing goes, because then you stand close by people, and then that's basically the only way you can get it. So if you just keep distance and put the masks on and so on and so forth, and then this thing stops, which was what happened basically. I mean, at least in Europe, it seems like things were keeping under control. And so it was like, okay, now we are distancing, we are keeping masks, and so we are still keeping it under control until we got the second wave in October, and where then I challenged also what I believed, because I said, this cannot be right, because this factor is constant, like the fact that we are keeping the distance, we are keeping the masks.
Yeah.
But the reality has changed. So you cannot, it's very hard to account for a function that changes by a variable that is being kept constant.
Yeah.
Which is
and I think that brings out the difference between public health and science there. Okay. Because why was public health digging its heels in on lockdowns and stuff like that, even though it was clear that it didn't do much good, right? I think that's your point, right? And it's because public health,
advisor to a national government anywhere on earth that said, "Oh, I was wrong. Maybe we should change the way we address this thing."
Yeah.
Maybe like in Italy,
and like it's so funny because how far that would actually go to actually building trust, right? Like they seem to somehow.
Yeah. I'm not sure.
Do the exact opposite of what they should be doing. I mean, what breeds more not just distrust but anger, not just being wrong, but it's like beyond being it's just a dogmatic foot stomping and a flagrant hypocrisy in many respects, right? That's the other aspect of it.
But you see, it's not just the public health. Is that the point? Is that most of the people bought that, and so they still. They have that vision. At least in Italy, I would say the majority of people still support this kind of approach. And despite the fact that it's been proved false over time and time again, people still believe, we should get this approach, and that's the only solution. And
it's a false sense of security too, right?
That's one. So I mean, that's one thing. The other thing is that I came to realize during this. It's something that is probably very general, but in this case, it's pretty clear that like scientists and people try to deal with facts, try to explain things with facts they can explain and they have some control of, like human behavior. Now, in my opinion, this, like the fact that there is some seasonality, there is some periodicity in these waves of COVID, because they happen, like if you take the same hemisphere and you take neighboring countries, then you see that they have waves that happen no matter what the policy is, more or less the same time, same peaks, like same dynamics, same thing. Like in Italy happens, and then we said it was triggered by the fact that we won the championship and people were celebrating in the streets. And then we had this basically in that week, then we had another wave of COVID coming, and so the theory could make sense, except that if you look at Malta, you look at Cyprus, you look at like other Mediterranean countries, and basically
and more a couple of weeks,
same latitude, more or less, they had the same kind of wave going on. And I said, okay, are they celebrating Italy as well in Cyprus? Are they celebrating in Malta? Are they celebrating in Greece?
I doubt they are in Malta.
But I think Maltese people like Italy a lot, as far as I know. They speak Italian, so they might be they might be fine.
I always thought there was a rivalry.
So that's the thing. I mean, people want to go. It's one thing. Politicians want to sell a product, and their product is we have control of the situation, and so they cannot say, oh, we control the weather, we control the humidity, we control the winds, we control the the dryness of the air. We can I think there's many parameters. There's much more parameters are related to the nature of seasons, of whatever it is, but there's other whatever. I have no idea. I don't have, that's outside of my field of expertise. I'm just looking at what happens, and if I see the same pattern going on in different places, no matter the policy, then I conclude that the policy is not a significant cause.
Yeah,
but politically speaking, people want to, first of all, they elect politicians. People want politicians to do something. It's not like, well, there's nothing I can do. It's like, it's the season. It's not like I can do much, and it's the Delta variant, whatever that means, and which is going to propagate within this climate, and it's going to have this kind of wave, no matter the countries. So it's going to be, you're going to have an additional wave of COVID cases. But the thing is that politicians are very eager to sell a model, scientific, or at least to uphold a scientific view, where the relevant variables are those variables where they have a control on, and people are very happy to hear about that. And the whole thing, is you can make a case for, if you forget about the evidence that we have against that, but you can make a case for that worldview. Like logically, it makes sense, right? Because I meet you, and if we're close enough, then I breathe. You breathe my droplets, and then you get COVID from me, and so that's why we need to keep separated. Then you ask, well, okay, why there are places like Australia that are being patrolled by the army, and people don't really meet, and still cases are growing like crazy. Mm-hmm. There must be another channel of propagation. It cannot just be this one, and probably the other channel is far less possible to control than the first one. Right. But people don't talk about it. Aerosols. Yeah. Aerosols, of course. Yeah. That's there's a lot of publications on that, on how COVID spreads through aerosols, but no one's really when you see the guidelines, like health guidelines, they're all aimed at containing the droplets. But if it's a secondary channel of propagation, then it's useless. It's like, cool.
Right.
What can you do?
Right. And we don't have perfect counterfactuals, right? But the nice thing about, at least in the United States, is we had some like kind of cool testing grounds where like you could have within even within one state, like counties that had different policies, right, enacted. And you could have some degree of hypothesis testing, right? Okay, well, my hypothesis predicts X, but now I keep seeing not X, right? So this counts against, maybe it's not a complete trashing or disposal of the hypothesis, but again, it's an evidential weight against it to various degrees. And what we kept seeing is what we should expect given a particular hypothesis kept not showing up. And in fact, what kept showing up was often the opposite of these predictions, specifically with lockdowns en masse, right? Vaccine is a whole different story. But I'll give you another example of the vaccine story. I was listening to a conversation with Bhattacharya, the doctor I mentioned, and here's a guy again who lets reality push back on him, because he was asked, well, what's going on in Florida? Because kind of his interviewer, Tom Woods, was kind of surprised at the kind of spikes that have been happening in Florida. And Bhattacharya said, he actually thinks that Florida might have shot itself in the foot because Florida actually did a really good job with early vaccination, despite all the slandering against DeSantis, right?
Targeted to the vulnerable.
Right, targeted vulnerable. However, they did it not knowing what we know now, that it at least pretty quickly after you get vaccinated, you can still pick up and transmit. The original predictions and thought was that this would help prevent transmission, but now we know that whatever it does with preventing that is actually pretty short-lived. So by Florida vaccinating really early, right, now that durability in that sense sort of wore off, right? Yeah. So that was Bhattacharya saying, look, yeah, I was off on this prediction, and here's me revising my theory to help explain why, because I thought the vaccine would do more to prevent transmission than it actually does, right? So the other thing I wanted to just now it slipped out of my mind. Oh yeah, public policy. Right. Here's the tough thing about public policy is not just about behavior change, but when you're a policy setter, it's not just about knowing the facts. It's also about knowing what facts are relevant. Right. Yeah. And that has been hugely overlooked, right? Because what we've seen in public policy setting, especially here in America, is this exceedingly myopic viewpoint, right? Of just like one fact, right? It's just like one thing that we're focusing on at the expense of all other things. And that to me is just an absolute complete catastrophe. And not only has it caused an enormous lack of trust in our institutions, but I think, like what's the long-term cultural damage that this does? I mean, I think it's worse in Europe in some ways. I think that there's still something in America of a healthier skepticism in many respects, in some places, of more of a merited skepticism. Now, in America, you also get like a sort of backlash to the other extreme of people being skeptical or denying things that I don't think they should as well.
There's in America, be plenty of people who think there's microchips in the vaccine too.
Yeah. So I mean, like
you find that in Europe as well. I think this kind of polarization of society is pretty much everywhere.
Right.
And again, in Europe, there's very, very different policies. It's at the moment, there's very different kind of.
Yeah, because at least what I understand about some of the passport things in Europe is they do recognize natural immunity, right? Which,
yes,
again, as a non-expert in this, but relying on experts that I feel tend to have the flags of credibility and trustworthiness, I'm told that the durability of natural immunity is really good, right? And like this needs to be recognized if we're going to try and put if you're going to put any type of passport system in place, and you're not recognizing, as Jim said, natural immunity, something fishy is going on here, right? Something really funky is going on.
That doesn't really make sense, because at least in Italy, well, I mean everywhere in Europe, when we talk about COVID passports. They do include natural immunity, and they do include negative testing. So you can get one like for a few days. If you get a negative COVID test, you can still get the QR code and you can travel.
Right.
Though the way it's being implemented, it varies a lot between countries, because now I heard Denmark said, I mean, Denmark is basically doing what every country on earth should be doing at the moment, in my opinion. It's like, we protected the most vulnerable. There's nothing more we can do. Let's just go back to normal. Mm-hmm. Which is, that the whole point of vaccination should be, once you find out that there's no real way you can completely halt the spread of COVID, because it's going to be around even with 100% vaccinated population, then the important thing would be to focus on people that are, that might get harmed from COVID, and just move on with life. And there's nothing more you can do. I mean, once you got the vaccine, then what can you do more? What are we expecting? It's like, and in Italy, I think things were pretty reasonable. I would say we are among the first countries in Europe to open back. And by the way, so the nice thing is, like back in April, when they started opening the schools again, and then slowly they started opening restaurants and bars. There were lots of physicians, professors, even mathematicians that were saying, "Oh, we'll be back soon to the 1,300 deaths per day." And we never got back to that point. I mean, most of the people talking in, on television and on the media were very, were making predictions of doom and gloom all the way. But the thing is that no one then went back to them a few months later and asked, "So you predicted 1,000 deaths? Right. where are they? I mean, we are at 50 deaths since, like, it's more or less stable since maybe May. And you said in April, if it were up to you, we would have closed unnecessarily society a few months more. And closing society, as you know, just because you don't see the damage, you don't have the graphs of collateral COVID damage, doesn't mean it's not there. And people don't understand this more. I mean, unless they are, of course, they are hit, but like people that, I don't know, teachers or people like me that work in an IT sector and can just work from home. You don't notice that. It's like you don't really feel the hit. You just win. In a way, you're demanding everything to shut down for.
Right.
And so again, you don't have the graph of collateral damage that is being caused by the lockdowns. And so that's why it's easier to sell the fact that you see we're doing something against the spread. Though then it's clear that the cure would have gone down no matter what.
Right. Let's here's a question that's going to open a can of, since this is the video that's going to get my YouTube taken down anyway, so we might as well just go all the way. Priest says, what do you guys think about the ethical problem of mandatory vaccination? Is it ethical to demand vaccination from medical staff? So let me say a few things just up front, stage setting. I actually am not such a hardcore libertarian. My hardcore libertarian days are mostly behind me, right? I actually think that the state has an in principle power to mandate something like a vaccine, right? So I don't have an objection that in principle the state could have moral legitimacy to do something like that, especially if, say that this thing really were the Black Death and we really had an effective vaccine. I not only think that, and by the Black Death, I mean like way deadlier than this thing actually is, right? Yeah. Like truly just ripping through society. 1 out every 4 people's dying, right? I think the state not only would have the power to do something like that, I think it would be obligated to, honestly, at that point, right? Yeah.
And the vaccine would have to actually work to eradicate. Right.
Yeah, the vaccine would have to be effective, but it could still have risks too. I think that the state could still say and admit that, hey, there's risks here, but it's just so bad. And I would agree, right? The vaccine does not need to be 100% safe for the state to have that power.
There are risks to drafting your citizens to fight a war.
Right.
Okay, but I think the state can do that for the common good.
Yeah.
Right?
So I'm just setting the stage here to say I don't have an in principle problem here. I have an in practice problem because this thing is not the Black Death, right? Clearly, it's not the Black Death, right? I mean, the latest stats. This one's from Bhattacharya shared this on. Infection survival rate is age up to 19. You have a 99.997% survival rate. 70 plus is 97.6% survival rate. So just like, again, not to downplay the deaths, but a sense of perspective is needed here. The vaccine is available. So I saw somebody ask, they got the vaccine. Do I think they made a mistake? No, I'm not. I'm not anti-vaccine on this, right? I think for some people in certain situations, it makes a lot of sense if you weigh the pros and cons to go and get vaccinated, right? So my thing is, yeah, there is some threshold, right, that can be crossed where the state would certainly have the power, if not the obligation, to mandate vaccinations and help in its distribution and stuff like that. But whatever that threshold is, this isn't it. Like, this is clearly not it, right? And by lowering the threshold to this degree for large-scale, massive interventions on something, to me, just seems to open up so many cans of worms, right, of the threshold now where the government can deeply interfere with your life under the guise of the common good, that I have a strong sort of prudential objection at this point, but not an in principle one. It's kind of my general view on this.
That's exactly where I am, Pat. And, I was actually just had a good talk with my wife about this. And I had a very good talk with my doctor about this recently. Okay. By the way, talk to your doctor, whether it's good for you. You should ask your doctor about that. Not Pat and Jim. Right.
Yeah. Right.
Right. Okay. But, okay. So if I'm in a position right now, or my wife and I are in a position right now with minor children, that we essentially could order our children to take this vaccine, right? Okay, we could make them do it, right? And for me, and I could be in a situation where I have to order my children to do something that puts them at risk for the sake of the common good, okay? But I also think unless that common good is in great peril, such as it's going to be like the unraveling of the fabric of society, so that my children themselves would be made vulnerable by that unraveling of the fabric of society, right? I think what I'm asking them to do, they have to have some gain in it for themselves. Okay. So take my 15-year-old son, who's like an incredibly healthy person, you know, great athlete, all this stuff. We've had COVID before. Okay. So even without having had COVID before, it's very unlikely for a very healthy 15-year-old boy to have problems with COVID. It's possible, and there are some freaky cases out there. I'm not denying that. Okay. It's possible, but it's very unlikely it would be really, really bad for him. It's also, I think, very unlikely he would have a bad reaction to the vaccine. Okay. It's possible. There's been some stuff, but it's very unlikely. Okay. So I'm weighing two low probability bads here. Do you see that? Okay. The one, but the thing is, it seems to me is like, okay, see, he could either risk the one low probability bad of getting reinfected, right? Or he could risk this other one that comes from the vaccine. Do you see that? And I'm just sort of switching which one he's going for there, right? Mm-hmm. So in that case, my attitude is non-intervention. Okay. Now, if it could be shown, and I just don't think it's been shown yet, that prior immunity plus vaccine is better for my son, then it becomes, then it seems to me it's upside to do it, but I just haven't seen that yet. Do you see my point? Okay. But what I worry about is like these kinds of considerations by mandates and passports, stuff like that, at least come down to America, they're not on the table, right? It's just do it. It doesn't matter what's actually in your interest. It doesn't matter if it really makes a difference to the common good. Just do it. And I worry about that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Edoardo, did you have any thoughts on this you want to chime in with?
No, I think I'm with you in the sense that it's, I mean, I get there can be some kind of utilitarian argument, some kind of externality argument that you can make for the vaccine to be mandatory, in the sense that, you know, like being not vaccinated, you have a negative externality on society in that you can carry the virus, you can spread it. But once it's clear that, you know, like the likelihood of spreading it, even when vaccinated, it's not so, I mean, it's still the same order of magnitude. So it's lower, sure, granted, but, you know, it's not, you can't really make a strong case.
It's not negligible.
Exactly. It's not negligible. You can still carry it with, again, it's a pretty substantial probability as far as we've seen in the waves of COVID in the UK and Israel, where I think it was around 40% of the infected people were, they had the vaccine. So they had the 2 shots of vaccine. And so it's very hard for me to see like what's the benefit for young people as well, like getting the vaccine. Like it's the way it's been pushed on society actually, again in Europe is pretty different in each country, because so we do have at European level this vaccine passport system, but this works in for example, if you come from Denmark, you don't need a vaccine passport in Denmark itself, but if you want to travel around in Europe, then the state of Denmark gives you this passport that allows you to travel freely throughout Europe. That's the reason why they have it at the moment. Right. Same thing in the UK. The national health system in the UK, they have this vaccine passport, which is sort of compatible with the European one, but it's not enforced in the UK. As far as I know, last time I checked, it was not. The whole plans for the vaccine passport mandates, like as they are right now in Italy, they have been scrapped.
Am I right, Edoardo? It'd almost be like if you had in America, you needed a passport for interstate travel, but within your state, it didn't matter.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. It's just that, you know, like the sort of the European Union acted as a federal government in that it grants the, you know, it's like the authority that's behind these codes that allow you to travel and like, get access to concerts or restaurants or whatever. Except that then in your own country, you might not need it. You just need somewhere else.
Right. I see Parisa has a follow up here. Sorry, finish your thought, Edoardo. Parisa says, in principle, should a condition for mandatory vaccination be that it blocks a spread of disease, or it is enough that it protects the recipient? Excellent question. Well, if it doesn't prevent the spread, then it's not a public health issue anymore. It's a private health issue, right?
Let me play devil's advocate and then answer it. Okay, right. Mm-hmm. There's the seatbelt argument there. Now we might agree that we shouldn't have seatbelt laws. Okay, but you know the seatbelt only protects the person putting the seatbelt on, right? Now it does say, though, I think it does say, you know, look at, you're getting in this accident, you know, and harming yourself by a car wreck. could drain on like public health resources.
Right, you're going to take
that.
up an ambulance, right? There's
or
the
if you're
content
Medicaid or Medicare or
externalities,
something like
right,
that.
yeah.
There's that. Okay, but leaving that aside, though, the thing is like putting the seatbelt on costs me nothing. There's no risk in putting a seatbelt on. Okay, do you see that? Whereas the vaccine, very, very small, very, very small, but there's a risk, right? Not a very small. Do you see what I mean? So I think you get the difference, the disanalogy in the seatbelt case. It's one thing to ask me to put a seatbelt on, right? Which clearly only does good, right? There's another thing to ask someone to take a vaccine that is, that's something new. There's known unknowns about it. I still think it's very low risk. Okay. I know like my two of my children are probably going to go to Europe next year and they'll probably get vaccinated to do it. And my son is in the Marine Corps, has been vaccinated. Right. Do you see what I mean? So I'm not saying the risk is so bad that you wouldn't do it, but there is a difference here I think if you're going to ask somebody to do something that carries, any measurable risk for them, then they should get some good out of it. Right. Do you see that? Okay. So I would say, now if it stops the spread of the disease, that's different. Okay. And the disease is terrible and grave. But if it's just simply that it's about protecting yourself and there is a risk that comes along with it, right? I don't think that can be mandated, right?
And again, let me just add something, because building up on what you said before about the trust in public authorities. I mean, I think as we said already, one of the big issues here is that the same authority has been wrong all along regarding the pandemic and regarding the solution to the pandemic, the containment measures. They are the same that are pushing the vaccines now in Italy. So I see why there is some distrust, because it's this medical establishment in a way, like I would say the medical media establishment, the medical
the medical media complex,
medical media government establishment, whatever it is, like those that have a say in public health through like directly, because of course, like if you go on national television and you have some kind of like people maybe believe you because you're a known professor and then you say something, of course it's an indirect way of putting pressure to the government, because people now believe your theory that we should close everything, and that if the government doesn't do anything, then I think the point is that there's a lot of power that is not even that these people have. They are maybe if they're not officially counselors to the government, these doctors and physicians and professors, they still exert a lot of power through the many sort of influencing the public opinion on the issue. Right. And so, but these people are the same that were pushing for very strict measures, very strict lockdowns, and they were predicting doom and gloom more than like thousands of deaths per day in July, and stuff like that never realized. And now they are the same that are pushing for the vaccines at all costs.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so now I see why, I can understand why people are skeptic about this, because I know that like the most of the arguments are being made against vaccines, against mandatory vaccinations. They are based on the fact that vaccines have some very bad side effects, because they take the math out of context. Mm-hmm. Because if you really look at the numbers, there's, as you said, there's very low probability of getting adverse side effects, and then it's very hard to tell whether the side effect you get it from the vaccine, because if you have 10 million people vaccinated, like statistically out of 10 million people, someone will get some kind of disease and then will die of it, like a heart attack. Then how can you say?
How many of those people you're vaccinating had COVID?
Yeah.
And myocarditis from the COVID they had underlying the vaccine. Yeah.
So that's very. I mean, in general, I'm not saying I wouldn't make that argument, which is the argument that most of the people against the vaccine they are doing. But again, just putting skepticism in the fact that public authorities are pushing for these kind of measures have been wrong for so much time, and they never acknowledge being wrong.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Then I think it's legitimate. And then the other issue now in Italy, we are implementing the. If I just made comments on this, because it's a very hot topic, because in Italy it's coming into effect in 1 month, so 15th of October. It's going to be mandatory to be vaccinated, basically for everyone. It's not mandatory vaccination, but if you're not vaccinated, you can be they can fire you, or they can freeze you cannot go to work. Basically, you cannot go to work unless you got the COVID passport, which you can get from recovering. You can get if you get the tested, but then you should spend like $20 per day just being tested every day or something like that. which is unfeasible for most of the workers.
Yeah, that's just they're just trying to bully you.
And they're basically mandating the vaccines without mandating the vaccines, because they're making it mandatory for basically everything to.
Right. Mm-hmm.
If you want to get to school, like and pick up your children, you can only if you got this green pass. And so this is in Italy is the only case where this is happening in this way, and it's so widespread.
And will they take an antibody test?
Yeah, sure. I know antibody. No, antibody. No.
So you can't use an antibody to show prior infection.
Oh, you can. Sorry, in that case, yes.
Yeah.
So can I? This falls on something you said, Edoardo. This is my pet peeve argument from both sides. Okay.
Okay.
And I think this is one where I can, people on both sides of the COVID divide have done this. Okay. So, it was like April, May of 2020 when someone finally said the quiet part aloud. Yeah. Really the death rate of this thing is like, we're talking less than 1%, and, it's stratified for age. And, if you start getting under 50, under 40, you're looking at like lightning strike. Please don't. Lightning strike, car accident kind of level risk here to get this thing right. And then the reply to that is you would see all these like headlines, 32-year-old man dies of COVID, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe like an otherwise healthy,
after just doing his marathon, right?
Okay. And I remember there was one, it was in the New York Times, where this guy's a pro hockey player and all this, and they left out the fact that he was like a opiate addicted person who was like in trouble. But anyway, but even like they would pull out someone was legitimately healthy person in their 30s who died of COVID. Okay, yes, that happened, and that's terrible. That's bad, but that was exceedingly rare. When you're talking about a disease in America that like maybe 150 million or 200 million people got, you're going to have some really weird cases like any other disease. Did you see that, right? Mm-hmm. And that's like that's getting people, because you want to affect their behavior, to disproportionately assess the actual risk. Do you see that? Okay.
Yeah.
But you saw the same thing happen from the vaccine reluctant crowd this summer, right? Which I'm sort of fellow traveler, right? Where you would see this headline like somebody some young kid having like a really, really bad myocardial reaction to the vaccine. Okay, yeah, that's really bad. But when you're talking like you've vaccinated now 50 million, 100 million people, there will be things that are going to happen, but those are still extremely low probability, right? Yeah. And one of the things that's really come to bother me from both sides of this is both sides' willingness to trick people into disproportionately assessing the risk here.
Oh yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I think that's a problem. I think it's a real problem, right?
Yeah. It's always the outliers that make the headlines, so it's easy to make a case on the headlines. Yeah. But if we can just comment on one thing, because that's they were in the comments, they are talking about the fact that the same people that are pushing vaccine mandates are the same that are declaring "my body, my choice."
Right.
Yeah. Which I sort of, it's an argument I wanted to make. It's like that with respect to the seatbelt argument. The fact that you have to inject something in your body, I see why some people don't want to do that. Like you can be on any ground, it can be religious ground, it can be really. So before really pushing someone into doing that, you should really make sure that there's an absolute need of doing this for the sake of the public health. For that the negative externalities of having somebody unvaccinated are really that large that you absolutely need to do that and override these people's wishes of not being injected with something.
Yeah,
regardless of the reason why. It can be any reason. It can be religious reason, just whatever.
The disanalogy too is, the question of in the abortion debate, is it my body, my choice, or is it someone else's body, my choice? You know what I mean? Right. Okay, and there's whereas you know what I mean. Whereas in the injection thing, it's only my body. That's that's at risk,
right, unless somebody pushes to an externality, right? So to be fair, right, the question. So this is where I think most pro-choice, pro-life people will actually be far more consistent, because most pro-life people I know don't say that like all ethics circles around personal autonomy, right? They don't take that position, right? But most pro-choice people kind of do, right? They park all ethics in personal autonomy. So now you do have a pretty glaring inconsistency, irrelevant of externalities, right? So, the pro-life person would, and I'm one of those people, right? Like, I think abortion is immoral because you're killing an innocent human being, right? And that's really all. That's all life comes down to is that it's always wrong to kill an innocent human being, intentionally kill an innocent human being, right? Now, I would still say it's wrong. Like if I knew I had COVID and I knew Jim was a fat slob that I hated and I thought I might be able to kill him if I go start like spitting on him, I should be put in jail for that, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, I've been trying to think about a way of, the old violinist argument for abortion.
Yeah, Thompson's argument. Yeah.
Yeah, like would it be right to force you to remain hooked up to dialysis with a violinist for 9 months? Whereas if you just disconnected from that dialysis machine, the person would die. But it wasn't your fault the violinist was sick in the first place and all that. Do you see that? Mm-hmm. Well, isn't this a similar thing? Is it right to ask a healthy person who doesn't have comorbidities and isn't obese and all this stuff? Is it right to ask that person to be hooked up to other people for 2 years in a lockdown? Right? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I'm not endorsing anybody. I think there's an interesting. Someone should write that up. Like someone should.
Right. Yeah, like another reverse violinist type of
reverse violinist. Yeah.
Which is the typical reason.
It's reverse only because of the ideological line that's been drawn. There's no logical philosophical reason to say this is a reversal. It's the same principle of autonomy. It's just that for political reasons, it's uncomfortable for some people to accept it. Right.
Right. Yeah.
But I guess. I don't know how the status. I mean, I think it's pretty much the same everywhere. Again, it's because I was pretty surprised by how much this debate about vaccine mandates is being like you're either against or you cannot really have a conversation on the philosophical implication of vaccine mandates and when is it right to do that. It's like, oh, we have to do this because COVID is so bad, and you don't really have room for discussion, at least in Italy. So if you want to open a debate and you just say, at least what's happened to many professors and people that were against it, like they said, I don't want to discriminate against my students. If some of my students don't want to get it, and they will not be allowed to go to attend the lessons, and they were rebelling against this kind of system, which I think it's fair to have these conversations, but they were immediately labeled as anti-vaxxers, anti-science, and so on and so forth. Even some otherwise very... so there were some history professors in Italy that are very, everyone loves them. They're very, very good, like very wise people. Otherwise, like in this case, they dare to challenge the status quo. And I was pretty puzzled by how much is it difficult to, like how quickly things moved from, okay, let's get the vaccines for the fragile people. Let's protect them and then just move on with their lives. And they move, no, we cannot move on with their lives unless everyone is vaccinated. And those who are not vaccinated, they are evil and they deserve to be excluded from society. Mm-hmm. And there's so much like revenge. So I mean, it's really a rabbit, like the way people are treating the unvaccinated and people are not willing to vaccinate, which, I mean, many of them, I might say, okay, they don't understand reasons. I mean, they might be stupid, frankly, like to put it in a very brutal way, but that's not the point. I mean, you still have the right to be stupid, and you still have the right to believe in stupid things. And so you can only make an argument on externalities, and I think the numbers are pretty clear on that. And I still don't see how come the political debate. Now we got a national unity government, and basically every party is backing these measures. Right. Just one party, which is at the government, that sometimes they say they don't really back it, and then sometimes they say no, it's like getting the passport is freedom or something.
Everything's the reverse of the truth, right?
Oh, dude, that's a great piece of Orwellian.
That's exactly what they claim. They said we need to expand our freedoms by getting the vaccine passport. But that's again, I'm not in principle against it. But first of all, you really need to show, and I don't think you can at this point. Once you look at the data in other countries, you really need to show that this thing is as basically. Reducing the externalities to zero, because otherwise you should apply the same kind of reasoning to other behaviors that people have that have negative externalities.
Yeah.
Right, and these are the other flags too. So the argument to externalities, right? If we make the threshold this low for large scale government interventions on externalities, like I mean, just like. Big Brother is like, there's no stopping him at that point, right?
Yeah,
right. Like, I just have such a strong in principle objection.
Welcome to Foucault's panoptic state, man.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's it's just not right.
Medicalized totalitarianism.
Yeah. But in my opinion, this polarization is they want to polarize. So at least there's always this need of finding some scapegoat, right?
Right, and that's the other
back
flag,
then,
right? So we were talking about flags before, right? Of like, what are some indicators, right, that something's fishy's going on? And yeah, Orwellian doublespeak is definitely one of them, right?
Yeah.
The other is Orwellian, like 2 minutes of hate, right? So that's what Edoardo was talking about. Like we have like these 2 minutes of hate, if anybody's read 1984, of just like the media just like demonizing and dehumanizing people. Right. Like really just putting on these 2 minutes of hate. And like that is another strong indicator that something really freaking weird is going on. Right. That warrants. Yeah. And I think this was Eduardo's point before, is like he's not like in terms of the numbers on the vaccine, he's extremely level headed. Right. But he's not blaming people for being skeptical, because it's just classic boy who cried wolf story in relation to the public institutions that have grossly failed in their predictions, have not only been caught lying to us, have admitted they'd be willing to lie to us, right? And this is actually like a really big epistemological problem, because the way we're set up, and Jim, I'm sure you'll have a lot to say about this, is like we're social dependent creatures, right? We actually need institutions and authority epistemologically, right? And when these things start to crumble and like we really can't like have authorities that we can rely on, like this is like a deep sort of existential crisis, right? Like we can't really operate well.
Welcome to modernity.
We really can't operate well in that type of epistemic environment, but it's kind of the epistemic environment we're getting into. And that's
no, this is what I was getting at when I opened up, is like human beings are not meant to bear cognitive burdens in isolation, right? That we always take up something that's been laid down for us and we vary the theme. Okay, well, what happened now is like the institutions that we should be taking as our starting point and moving, and then worrying, like having something to be critical towards, we can't even trust them to lay the groundwork for the discussion anymore, right? And I want to make my clear, I think this is where you're coming from too, Edoardo, is, I'm not an anti-vaxxer, and as Pat knows, my attitude towards the vaccine has been like a moving target for the last almost a year now. I remember like when it first came out in January, we were like, oh yeah, of course we'll get that. Even though since we had COVID, we're like, well, let everybody else go first, because it's not really a rush for us to get it, right? By the time the summer got here, we were like, I don't know, wait a little bit, right? And now I think our view is like, okay. I mean, if you could show me it would actually do some good on top of a natural immunity, I may be inclined to do it. I just haven't seen that yet. So the question isn't whether the vax is good or bad, for me at least. The question is whether or not it should be mandated, right? And whether or not the mandation of it is a very, very, very bad sign, and whether or not I can blame anybody for being really skeptical about it, given, as you point out, Edoardo, how badly public health people have carried on throughout this whole thing. Yeah. Right.
Spot on. Right. And like, there's a culpability there on these guys, right? Like, especially now that we have something, or, it is classic boy who cried wolf, right? Right. There's like, if you've trained people to be skeptical, and now like you really need to get them to move on something, or that can make a positive difference in their lives, and you've abused them to such an extent, like there is a culpability there. To what degree, I don't know. Who does it get assigned to? I don't know. I've got a few names in mind, but I'll keep them to myself at this point, right?
No, but I see. I mean, the problem is that I don't think that most of the population is trained to sort of think in that way, in the sense that before, like public health regulators, they used to make predictions, and if everyone does like what we recommend, then it's going to be fine. And then things didn't work out well, and then they needed to find a scapegoat. And this happened for basically every wave of COVID. And I think at this point in time, they are looking for another scapegoat, which is the unvaccinated. So first, it was during the first wave, it was the runners. There were people doing jogging, were daring to go out of their homes and running in on the streets and in the parks. And in Italy, I remember on social media, there was so much hate against these people because they wanted to keep fit and just go and run on your own. And people say, "Oh, you're going around. You're not allowed to do that because we had a very strict lockdown." And then it moved from those people. Then it was the people were not wearing masks properly. Was people meeting in the parks. Then was young people trying, they wanted to have fun and meet with other young people. And so we're still spreading the thing, despite the fact they were being told to, shelter in place, to stay home. And so I think there's a constant blame. They always need to put someone to blame. And so there's, again, people that trust the public authorities. They think they trust science because they trust some scientists. And so they basically blindly follow whatever the lead scientist would say at this point in time, without even you don't update your weights. This guy said this, and this thing happened, and he kept this line. Mm-hmm. And so this is something that's dogmatic. It's not revising. Is
right.
It's like
that was my point.
In terms of neural networks, it's not updating the weights of the neural net, the way the things learn. It's like the way neural networks learn in informatics. So that's the usual thing you should do. But
just highlighting a comment from our buddy Horseman here. He says, I never thought I would say this, but Nicki Minaj equals punk rock, black is white, and up is down. So this shows how out of touch I am. I don't even know who Nicki Minaj is. But now I'm seeing all the headlines about. So
same here. That's same here. I know.
Somebody actually needs to catch me up. Apparently, it was somebody who said something, and it was against the narrative, and now they're banned from Twitter or something. I don't know the whole story.
A hip hop star, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And I think it was specifically she was talking about like race and how like she thought people of her race were being duped by this, I think is what it was. I'm not sure. I didn't follow it directly myself.
I just heard she made some comments, if I'm not mistaken, on the vaccine. She was doing her research or something, like she didn't really want to get a vaccine or something. I don't.
I can't say anything about it because I don't know anything about it. But let's take this one. Do you think the critiques of scientism applies to positivism as well? So I actually put scientism in the headline here. We haven't really directly touched on that. Certainly, I think it's blooming in the culture at large, right? So when I think of scientism, right, there's sort of so many different brands and flavors of scientism, but scientism is both ontological and epistemological, right? So scientism isn't science, right? We got to draw that immediate distinction, right? Scientism is a large scale philosophical thesis, right? That either science can help us determine what our ontology is of the things that exist, right? Or science sort of restricts our epistemology. It's how we know things, or it's the only way of knowing things, right? So I think there's a million things wrong with scientism. My general critique of scientism is that it's either trivial or self-defeating, right? So in the sense that it's trivial, and this is the issue I have with some adherents of scientism, is they'll just sort of define everything as science, right? So take the epistemological version. Somebody will say, well, look, if something doesn't come through the scientific method, then it doesn't count as knowledge. You can't say you know something, right? The problem is if they just let anything count as science, then we don't actually have much of a problem, right? But most of the time they'll restrict it to something like the hypothetico-deductive method. Well, then the problem is that claim itself isn't something that can be verified through the hypothetico-deductive method, right? So it doesn't even meet its own standard, right? It fails to meet the criteria that it tries to set for everything else. The question, though, is would that type of critique, and Jim, maybe you have, and Edoardo, you guys have your own thoughts, apply to positivism. The way I see it, positivism is more about meaning in a sense, right? But scientism to me is just a mutation of positivism, and positivism is just a mutation of Humeanism, right? So all of this largely, in some sense, traces back to kind of Hume's fork originally. Jim, why don't you give us the brief, some of your
yeah, I mean, I don't feel any need to worry about positivism than I do to hunt a brontosaurus, right? I mean,
it's dead, right? It's an
extinct breed, yeah. And so what was logical positive? It was a theory of meaning, right? Mm-hmm. That wanted basically to reduce meaning to reference, right? And that was it. But that meaning just was acquaintance, and the only kind of acquaintance that was entertained was straightforward empirical matters, right? And there's just various good arguments against that. There's self-referential arguments against it. I think Wittgenstein's private language argument is designed to defeat that. Okay, so I don't see scientism as intimately connected with positivism, right? Okay, yeah, I just see scientism as seeing science as this sort of totalizing access to truth, such that there's no other significant type of truth that one could get at, right, independently of the exercise of the scientific method, right? And I don't necessarily see that as self-refuting. I just don't see a good reason to believe it. Does that make sense? Right.
Well, as
right.
a broad
So,
epistemological theory, it's going to have self-referential issues, right? It depends how, because it's not like falsification, right? Where like it's pretty clear, like with Popper was saying, like, look, I don't think everything has to be susceptible to falsification, but if we're going to call something science, then I think that has to be susceptible to falsification.
Yeah, but I think you know, like you can pull out the basic card. So yeah, it's basic.
Right.
It's just it's fundamental. Right?
Sure. Yeah. And then,
which
and then
I have very
right.
Yeah, I have very, but I mean, like everyone does it at some point. I have low patience for that kind of appeals anyway. Right. Okay. But so I think but the thing is, you can always get out of self-reference problems by playing properly basic. Right.
Right.
So you know what I mean. And for me, it seems that it's for the obvious fact that there's much to know about life that is not captured by anything in the scientific method. Right. And so for me, the scientism, the problem isn't self-reference. It's that it's obvious the scope of existence goes beyond what the scientific method can capture. Right.
Eduardo, anything you want to add?
No, but I'd like to comment on this comment they have. Alex Ray makes the scientist makes the scientists and experts into the clerical class. And I think we had the conversation already in the sense that during these COVID times we've seen, I mean, at least I've noticed the fact that many scientists were actually being seen as priests in a way, like they were defending a dogma. They were not really. It was not about the method. It was about the kind of statements you have to believe in. It's not about the method that brings you to believe in those statements.
It went creedal. It became a creed.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think the whole behavior that you find regarding heretics, like the people that don't really believe the official statements or try to question them, and the fact that you need to have the witch hunt, and there's a lot of aspects to this that are extremely you would say that made scientists in a sort of clerical class that makes the whole thing as a sort of as a credo. It's a form of religious belief. It's not.
The thing is like this shouldn't be surprising, right? Like broadly surprising, because obviously science has done many wonderful and impressive things, right? So it carries a lot of authoritative weight. So it just makes sense that people who want to have influence and power are going to try and get that on their side, right? Yeah. So it's not a surprising, and it also isn't surprising that people who are practicing scientists might occasionally let the position go to their own heads as well, right?
No.
That could never.
If
happen,
you were to
right?
disagree with me, you'd be disagreeing with science.
You'd be a science denier. You'd be a science denier, wouldn't you? Right?
If you disagree with me,
right. So I guess the question is, has
that been said?
Yeah. So I guess the question, has scientism fueled this? Right. That's a deeper question. And I think yes, it has. Right. Scientism, as a broadly philosophical thesis, right, has from the academy trickled down into culture, right, and I think has played a role in people having this sort of, I don't know, like what do you call it? This sort of uncritical posture, this very unscientific posture.
I call it an unreflective deference.
Right. Yes, those are the words, Jim, right there. Yeah. Exactly that. And yeah, I do think the philosophy of scientism has played a significant role in this. Now it's funny because, like, I don't know what your pulse is on this, Jim, but like I kind of see that it will go the way of positivism at some point, right? Like it will. Like if it hasn't already started to.
Well, already, no, see, I'm less optimistic about that, or maybe like have just never take is like once again like positivism was not a religious view. Okay, it was a refutable doctrine in the logic of semantics, right? Mm-hmm. You see what I mean? It was subject to philosophical refutation. People were not like Karl Hempel was not an adherent to positivism because of a quasi like religious view. Okay. Whereas I think what we're seeing with scientism culturally now is it's not that. It's become a kind of religious thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. You see what I mean? You know.
Yeah, I agree. All right, well, let's
The Carl Hempel never stood up and says, if you deny positivism, if you refute my views, you've refuted, you know, science itself or something. You know, like they were trying to solve a problem, right? They were doing. I mean, whatever we think about their position, they were doing philosophy, right? What's going on now is not that. This is straight, like this is groupthink, right?
Yeah. All right, so we're out of time. This has been a blast, as I knew it would be. We are out of time. We've got to go. It's late where Edoardo is. I know I'm about to be called up for dinner anyways. This is so we got to continue this. We're gonna continue this conversation, Edoardo. It's always really good to get your
it's nice
perspective on all this. It's always really good to catch up.
And Edoardo, I want to talk more AI with you sometime. I think we started to talk about that pretty well. And I want to talk aliens with you, my man. I want to talk aliens with you.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm not the expert. I'm not an expert on either field.
No, that's okay.
I know something more, but
no, I think it would be fun. And I think well, here's the deal. Like we've just said, we don't, you know, we're trying to get over the cult of expertise. Like two educated men can talk about things, right, without being an expert, right? As long as we're not telling people that somehow they should take action on what we say. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think the YouTube algorithm agrees?
Pardon me?
Do you think the YouTube algorithm agrees with this view?
They do not. They do not. We'll go to Rumble, whatever it takes.
All right. Okay.
Well, I've got so many more thoughts, but we're going to save it for next time. Edoardo, before we go, at least for my channel and my listeners, mention your stuff. Where can people follow you? Mention your band real quick because you do a lot of cool stuff. Yeah, so just put some plugs in. Yeah.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to follow me on social media, my nickname is Gattopancheri666, but you can have a look at Nanor of Steel. Svena is a bass player and founding member of this band that's active since 18 years this year.
Nice.
So you can find us pretty much everywhere. Just go type Norwegian reggaeton. If you never heard about the band, then you'll find.
Jim, you're gonna love them, man. If you haven't listened, they're a blast.
Check them out. I'll check them out.
And that's it. So thanks a lot for having me. I'm looking forward to the next episode.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in, everyone. Please like and share this video before it gets banned, and we appreciate your tuning in. We'll catch you next time. Peace.